deal I ever helped a buyer make was the one I told them not to do. If you're in the process of buying a business right now, or you're about to make an offer on one, this video is specifically for you. I want to start with a number. The average cost of closing a deal with red flags that were visible in due diligence and ignored, in renegotiations after close, in performance that didn't materialize, in businesses that required capital the buyer didn't plan for, is between $300,000 and $600,000 on a single transaction. This is not the cost of a bad business. That is the cost of a good business with a fixable looking problem that turned out not to be fixable. A client of mine, I'll call him James, spent 7 months finding a business to buy. 38 years old, left a corporate job, had $600,000 in capital, found a B2B distribution company generating $1.1 million in SDE, $6.2 million asking price, strong margins, good customer list, clean books. You've probably been in a version of this moment. 7 months in, you've done your research, you've run the numbers, you've told your family, the deal feels real. The momentum is real. You are already thinking about what you're going to do differently when you own it. That is exactly when the red flags are hardest to see. James brought me in at the LOI stage. Within 48 hours of reviewing the business, I found 3 of the 5 deal killers I'm going to walk you through in this video. Any one of them individually might have been manageable. Together, they described a business whose performance was entirely dependent on conditions that would change the moment the acquisition closed. I told James to walk away. He was not happy. We had a long conversation. At the end of it, he walked away. The buyer who eventually closed that deal 9 months later paid $5.8 million. Within 14 months of closing, revenue had declined 31%. The business they bought for $5.8 million was generating enough cash flow to service roughly $3.5 million in acquisition debt. The rest was a problem the new owner was going to live with for years. James didn't save $400,000 by walking away. He saved his financial future. The 5 things I saw in that deal in 48 hours, that's what this video is. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 deal killers that no amount of price reduction, earnout structure, or due diligence negotiations can fix. What each one looks like on the surface, what it signals underneath, and a 4-question framework I call the walkaway test that you can apply to any deal you're evaluating right now. Be sure to listen to the end, because at the end of this video, I'm going to tell you the one red flag that almost every experienced buyer has ignored at least once. It's the one that feels like a feature when you first see it. It only reveals itself as a problem after you close. And by then, it's the most expensive lesson in your acquisition career. I'm Matt Ewell, founder of Ridge Trail Capital, 18 years in the business, 200 million plus in M&A transactions. If you're in the process of evaluating a business to buy and nobody has given you a clear framework for which problems are fixable and which ones will follow you for the life of the business, that gap is exactly what this channel is for. We publish a new video every single week. Hit subscribe below. Here is the core problem with due diligence, and understanding it will change how you approach every deal you look at from this point forward. The deeper you get into an acquisition, the harder it becomes to see the business clearly, because you become more invested. You've spent time and money, you've told people, you've made plans. The deal has an emotional gravity that pulls you towards closing, even when the data is telling you something different. Every experienced acquirer has felt this. You find a problem in due diligence, and instead of asking, is this a deal killer? You ask, how do I get comfortable with this? Those are not the same question. The first one keeps you honest. The second one keeps you in the deal. The buyers who close the best deals over the long term are not the ones who are the best at finding deals. They are the ones who are best at walking away from the wrong ones. That distinction sounds obvious. It is almost impossible to execute when you're 7 months in and emotionally committed. The walkaway test, which I'll give you in detail in the solutions section, is specifically designed for that moment, when you're too close to the deal to think clearly. The 4 questions cut through the noise. They don't tell you what you want to hear. They tell you what you need to know. With more businesses coming to market every year as the silver tsunami accelerates, the lower middle market is seeing a meaningful increase in first-time buyers. People who have never navigated an acquisition before, who are making the most important financial decision of their lives, who are facing sellers with experienced representation and often years of preparation. The asymmetry. Experienced seller, first-time buyer, creates pressure. When you found the right business, when the seller is motivated, when the market is competitive, walking away feels like losing something you've already won. It isn't. Walking away from a deal with structural problems is not losing. It is the most profitable decision you can make, measured by what you avoid rather than what you gain. Deal killer 1, customer concentration above 25%. If any single customer in the business you're evaluating represents more than 25% of revenue, you are not buying a business. You are buying a customer relationship, and customer relationships do not always transfer. Here's how this plays out. The seller has built a strong relationship with a major customer over 15 years. That customer trusts the seller. They buy because of who they're buying from. When the acquisition closes and a new owner shows up, someone they didn't choose and don't know, the relationship dynamics change, sometimes immediately, sometimes over 6 months. The question to ask, can I speak directly with the customer before close, and will they commit to in writing to continue the relationship under new ownership? A seller who won't facilitate that conversation is telling you something important about how transferable that relationship actually is. No written commitment from a customer representing 30% of revenue is not a negotiating point. It's a deal killer. Price it accordingly or walk away. Deal killer 2, revenue drivers that won't survive the transition. Some businesses generate revenue through mechanisms that are specific to the current owner and will not transfer to a new one. Referral networks built on personal relationships, pricing power derived from the seller's reputation in a niche market. Contract terms negotiated by a founder that a buyer will not be able to renew on the same basis. This is harder to see than customer concentration because it doesn't show up clearly in the financials. The revenue is real, the margins are real, but the source of that revenue is not the business, it is the person. And you are buying the business, not the person. The question to ask, walk me through how your 3 largest customer relationships were initiated and how they are maintained. What would happen to each of them if you're no longer involved? Listen for hesitation. Listen for an answer that relies heavily on the seller's personal history with the customer. That hesitation is the answer. Deal killer 3, lease or key contract risk at transition. If the business operates from a lease location and the lease is within 24 months of expiration, that is a risk that needs to be resolved before you close. Landlords who have been happy with the current tenant may not offer the same terms to a new owner. A lease that was negotiated 10 years ago at a favorable rate may not be renewable at those rates in the current market. The same logic applies to key supplier contracts, licensing agreements, or any contractual relationship that is material to the business's operation. If that contract has a change of control clause, a provision that allows the other party to renegotiate or terminate when ownership changes, you need to know that before you close. The question to ask, pull every material contract in this business and flag every one that a change of control clause expires within 36 months. If the seller's attorney pushes back on that request, you have your answer about how much they want you to know before you sign. I want to stop here for a moment because there's something I think you need to understand about how this industry works and why most buyers will never hear what I'm about to tell you. Most of the buyers who come to me in the middle of a deal, at the LOI stage, 60 or 90 days in, they've already found their broker, and that broker has a listing agreement. And that listing agreement pays them when the deal closes, not when the buyer makes a good decision, when the deal closes. I have walked away from commissions. James wasn't the first buyer I told to walk away, and he wasn't the last. Every time I do it, I'm making a decision that costs me money in the short run. I do it anyway because I have watched what happens to buyers who close deals they shouldn't have. And I have never seen one of those situations end well enough to make me wish I'd stayed quiet. Most advisors in your acquisition process, your attorney, your accountant, your lender, are not incentivized to tell you not to close. The attorney bills more hours when the deal closes. The lender earns their commission when the loan funds. There is no one in a typical acquisition who is paid specifically to protect your downside. That's the gap this industry has. And it's why having someone in your corner whose primary obligation is to your outcome, not to the transaction, is worth more than any single element of deal structure. Deal killer 4, key person dependency beyond the owner. Most buyers look for owner dependency. You've heard about that. You're checking for it. What most buyers don't check, because nobody tells them to, is key person dependency one level below the owner, the operations manager who has been with the company for 18 years and knows every system, every customer, every supplier relationship in the business. The sales director whose personal relationships drive 60% of new business. The technical lead without whom the product or service can be delivered at current quality. These people are not the owner. They won't show up in an owner dependency analysis. But if any of them leave in the 12 months after you close, and key employees leave after acquisitions at a significantly higher rate than baseline, the business you bought is not the business you're running. The question to ask, who in this business other than you would be most difficult to replace? What is their current compensation relative to market? Do they have any equity or economic interest in the transaction? If the answer to the last question is no, you need to understand why they're going to stay after the person who hired them and promoted them is gone. Deal killer 5, the red flag that feels like a feature. I promise you the one red flag that almost every experienced buyer has ignored at least once. The one that feels like a feature, here it is, a deeply involved owner. You see it and you think, perfect. He's passionate. He knows every detail of the business. He'll stay on for the transition and show me everything. The handover will be smooth because he's not going anywhere for 12 months. What you're actually looking at is a business where the owner is the business. The customers don't buy from the company, they buy from him. The key employees don't stay for the culture or the compensation. They stay because of him. The supplier relationships, the referral network, the institutional knowledge, it lives inside one person who is about to become an employee, and the most motivated, most present, most knowledgeable seller in the world cannot transfer 20 years of relationships and reputations in a 12-month transition. The question to ask, if you were hit by a bus tomorrow and couldn't work for 90 days, what would happen to the business? Listen to the answer carefully. If the honest answer is it would struggle significantly, that is not a business you are buying. That is a job you are purchasing, and you are paying a business multiple for it. I put together a red flags checklist. It covers all 5 deal killers with the specific due diligence question for each one. What a good answer looks like, what a bad answer looks like, and the threshold at which each flag becomes a walkaway signal rather than a negotiate down signal. If you're currently evaluating a business or you're about to go under contract and you don't have a structural framework for separating the fixable problems from the structural ones, that checklist is specifically for you. Most buyers who go through it identify at least one flag in the deal they're currently looking at that they hadn't fully examined. Sometimes it's a customer concentration issue they had mentally noted and moved past. Sometimes it's the owner involvement problem they've been treating as an asset. In either case, having the framework before the LOI is worth significantly more than having it after. The average cost of the deals that close with these flags unresolved is $300,000 to $600,000. That gap is expensive. If you're interested, download the link below. Here's the practical framework. I call it the walkaway test. 4 questions. Apply them to any deal where you found a problem and you're trying to decide whether to push through or step back. The walkaway test. Question 1. Is this problem structural or circumstantial? A structural problem is built into the nature of the business, owner dependency, customer concentration, key person risk. It exists regardless of price. Reducing the price doesn't eliminate the risk. It only changes how much you pay to inherit the risk. A circumstantial problem exists because of a specific condition that can be changed. A lease that can be extended, a system that can be documented, a customer concentration that is actively being diversified. These are negotiating points. Price them in, require resolutions as a closing condition, or both. If you cannot clearly categorize a problem as circumstantial, if you find yourself saying it's kind of structural, but maybe fixable, treat it as a structural problem. Ambiguity in this question is a structural problem. Question 2, does the price reflect the risk? Every structural problem has a dollar value. Owner dependency in a business where the owner drives 60% of customer relationships is worth a 1 to 1.5 turn reduction in multiple. Customer concentration above 30% is worth a 0.5 turn to 1 turn reduction. These are not arbitrary discounts. They are the market's pricing of risk. If you've identified a structural problem and the seller is unwilling to adjust the price to reflect it, the seller believes the risk is yours to absorb, not theirs to price. That is a negotiating position you are entitled to reject. And in a market where buyers have more options than they did 2 years ago, you have leverage to reject it. Question 3, Can you quantify the worst case scenario? Take every structural problem you've identified and model what happens if it goes wrong in year one. Customers leave, key person exit, lease not renewed at favorable terms. What does revenue look like? What does cash flow look like? Can the business still service the acquisition debt? If the worst case scenario produces a business that cannot service its debt, that is not a risk you are managing. That is a risk you are absorbing entirely. No amount of optimism about the transition period changes the math on a worst case that breaks the deal economics. Question 4, am I still asking, how do I get comfortable with this instead of, is this a deal killer? This is the most important question on the test, and it is the one most buyers skip because it required a kind of honesty that is hard to sustain when you are 7 months into a deal and emotionally committed. If you are rationalizing rather than evaluating, if you are walking backwards from the conclusion that you want to close and looking for reasons to support it, you have already answered the question. The walkaway test only works if you apply it before you decide what you want the answer to be. Let me go back to James. 7 months, $600,000 in capital ready to deploy. A deal that felt right. A seller who was motivated, a business that looked good on paper, and 3 structural problems that would have followed him for years. James didn't lose 7 months when he walked away. He recovered 7 months. He took the walkaway test seriously, got an honest answer, and made a decision that protected his capital and his future. He found a different business 6 months later, closed it. It's performing well. He is glad he walks away from the first one every single time that he looks at his numbers. The buyer who closed the deal James walked away from has a different story. Not one I'm in a position to tell, but you already know how it ends. The walkaway test is not a complicated framework. It is 4 questions that cut through the emotional noise of a deal you're already committed to. Apply it to the deal you're looking at right now. Apply it honestly. And if the answers tell you to walk away, walk. If you want a second set of eyes on the deal you're currently evaluating, someone who will apply the walkaway test to your specific situation, give you an honest read on whether the problems you're seeing are structural or circumstantial, and tell you what they think you should do regardless of what that means for a commission, book a free value discovery call. Click on the link below. There's no pressure, no pitch, just your deal and an honest conversation. Because the best deals go to the buyers who know exactly what they're looking for before they start looking.